All right, here we are, unto us. Charles Taylor is a Canadian philosopher, Catholic, Christian in origin. He wrote a magisterial book called A Secular Age, and in it, he describes this secular world that we're living in. One of the ways he describes it is the malaise of modernity. The malaise of modernity. And really, a key thought here from Taylor is that there's endless freedom. Like in our culture, there's endless freedom, but there's no purpose. We're not directed to a certain good. We have the most amount of freedom, but we really don't know what to do with our freedom. And what he says happens in the malaise of modernity, endless freedom, no purpose, is that we have a sense of emptiness, that there's a sense that something is missing in our existence. And so, in the malaise of modernity, as meaning-seeking creatures, we ask huge questions. The human being, the human experience demands that we ask enormous questions like, what is this all for? What is the purpose of sex? Why is everybody else so happy at Christmas and I'm not? Why did this happen to me? Why am I so angry? How did my experience as a child hinder my ability to love well? Why do all of my closest relationships disintegrate? Why do I have a sense that there's always more to do, even though I've done so much? These are the questions that we're asking as human beings living in this modern world. We're searching beings looking for answers, and we know that there's a missing piece. And so we have what we believe, the ability to answer those questions. What's missing in my life? So we have these destination points in mind. If I could just do that, if I could just get there, if I could just have this, right? If I could just have a better vacation, longer vacation, and somewhere new, maybe an experience will help fill this void, this missing piece that I have in my life. Maybe it's a new spouse. Maybe the excitement of a new love, romantic relationship will help. Maybe if I finally shed these 15 pounds I'm carrying around, maybe that will boost. Maybe if I have more money, maybe if I get a new job, a promotion, a degree, maybe if I move, a new city, maybe that's it. We're always searching, right? Trying to find this missing piece. But the problem with that is we don't listen to the people who have all those things that we think we need, and they're still not happy either. So Jim Carrey, really well-known actor, Jim Carrey says this: I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that that's not the answer. There's something missing. We don't listen to the people who have all these things, and they are not happy either. This is life in the modern world. My contention, my submission to you this weekend is simply this: that Jesus is the answer to our search for a life that is whole, happy, and fulfilled. Jesus is actually the thing that's missing for a life that is whole, happy, and fulfilled. So unto us, this series is just looking at these Old Testament whispers and longings and search for the culmination of the story of Israel, the story of the Old Testament. When, how is this going to happen? Angels long to look into these things. So we've been planted in Matthew's gospel. Matthew's an eyewitness of the life of Jesus Christ. And Matthew's gospel is all about seeing and showing Jesus as the fulfillment of the Old Testament Hebrew scriptures. And so we read about this in Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Here's what Jesus says: do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I haven't come to negate the Old Testament. No. I've not come to abolish them. What does he say? I have come to, what? Fulfill them. The search is over, that all of these hopes and longings of the Old Testament is found in me. And so you can see this throughout Matthew. I won't go through all of this, but you can see Matthew's gospel, and it fulfills the Old Testament scriptures. Born of a virgin, Isaiah chapter 7. We're getting to that next week. Jesus born in Bethlehem, Micah 5. We looked at that last week. Jesus fulfills Israel's story. That's what we're looking at this week from Hosea chapter 11. Baptized, sought by Herod to be killed, preceded by John the Baptist, healed diseases, and all of the scriptures that show these Old Testament longings and desires and the search fulfilled in Jesus Christ. So we're going to continue with Matthew's brilliant formation of the Christmas story, of him bringing things from the Old Testament. There's actually 5 of these Old Testament longings, searches, predictions, prophecies fulfilled in the birth of Jesus. This is number 3, and we're looking at Jesus fulfills Israel's story from Hosea chapter 11. Now, this is a part of the Christmas story that you usually don't get on a Christmas card, right? Usually the Christmas cards, like the wise men, the shepherds, the wise men leaning down, little baby Jesus, this kind of cute nativity scene. This is anything but. This is the flight, the escape of Mary and Joseph and Jesus from Herod the tyrant, who's going to murder a whole generation of boys from Bethlehem and the area. They leave to Egypt. This is the real, not the ideal, but the real Christmas story. So I wanted to read it to you just to kind of set up our time together. This is Matthew chapter 2. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." What a dramatic scene, all right? And then Matthew says, "So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was," here's the word again, "fulfilled." The search is over of what the Lord said through the prophet, fulfilled. "Out of Egypt I called my son." This sets up the whole thing. The prophet is who? It's Hosea, and this is what is being fulfilled out of Egypt. So the flight to Egypt and then the return back from Egypt is what's being fulfilled. Now here's Hosea chapter 11, verse 1. "When Israel was a child, I loved him," and here is what's quoted, "and out of Egypt I have called my son." This is the prophetic search, longing, and the fulfillment in Jesus Christ. And so here's what we're going to see. 3 ways that Jesus fills this emptiness, the malaise of modernity of our lives. He gives us a new love, a new story, and a new freedom. So let's get going. A new love. We're going to camp here in Hosea 1, knowing that Matthew ratifies and brings this text from Hosea in Matthew chapter 2. But we're going to camp here in the original verse. Here's what it says. "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt again I called my son." I want to make a brief comment to show how different this is from last week in Micah chapter 5. Micah chapter 5, what does he say? He makes a forward prediction prophecy about the location and the lineage of Jesus Christ. 700 years before, in Bethlehem from the line of David. Hosea is different because it's not really a prophecy. It's not a prophecy at all. It's actually a retelling of past events. Hosea is writing after the exodus of Israel from the hand of Pharaoh. When Israel was a child, a toddler in its infancy, is what he's saying. "Out of Egypt I called my son." He's referencing the exodus. So think about this. Matthew is writing here. He's bringing to what Hosea is saying, and Hosea is referencing something in the past, not the future. So here's what Matthew is doing. Matthew is saying this is typical of the actions and activity of God. That as he called Israel out of Egypt, he is now going to call and is calling Jesus out of Egypt as well. This is the pattern of the sovereignty of God acting in history. So it's not really a prophecy, it's a fulfilling of Israel's story. So Jesus here is not fulfilling a prophecy, but rather fulfilling the story of God's nation Israel in the people and in the events of the Exodus. Okay, now I want to zoom in for the next 2 thoughts on this word son. We're going to first focus in on the definition, how Hosea and Matthew are defining this son differently. Okay, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son." So Hosea means this as Israel, or the nation of Israel. So if we go to Exodus chapter 4, it says, "Then say to Pharaoh, this is what the Lord says, Israel is my firstborn son." So Hosea means this as the nation and people of God in Israel. But obviously, Matthew is saying a different son. It's not just the son in Israel, it's the very son of God. It's very, very different. That here we see that Jesus is actually fulfilling the role, the hopes, the expectations of the Old Testament people of God, Israel. That Jesus is the new son. He is not the nation, he's actually the son of God. So let's camp at that idea that Jesus is the true Son of God. Now, if you grew up in church, you're like, the incarnation and Jesus and all the cute stuff and Christmas and Advent, the lighting of the candles, the cute kids choir, all that sort of stuff. But my sense is that I actually have an amnesia to how wonderful and how beautiful this actually is. And instead of going through Christmas with this sense of emptiness and yawning about this, I think if you actually understood again, for the very first time, what it means that Jesus is the Son of God sent from the Father for us to not just obey, not be dutiful towards, but actually to love. It's going to change your Christmas and it's going to change your life. So I want to ask, what does the Father think about the Son? Because as we see the Father's thought about this Jesus as the Son of God, I think it's going to reframe our understanding that Jesus is the true Son of God, as we see in Hosea. And so what I want to do is I want to bring us to Jesus' baptism in Matthew chapter 3. Now, this is a chapter after that Matthew is saying that Jesus is the true Son of God, not the nation of Israel, but the Son of God. It's hinted at in Matthew chapter 2, and now the heavens open and the Father speaks a word to Jesus about his identity. So as this is Matthew chapter 3, as soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. Notice Jesus is here, went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was open and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and lightning on him, and a voice from heaven. You see the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit. There's only 2 times in the Gospels where the Father speaks to the world about who Jesus actually is, about his thoughts about Jesus, and it's here. What does this voice from heaven say? This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. All of the hopes, desires, dreams of the nation of Israel is now seen and embodied in Jesus. This is my Son, not Israel. This is my Son, whom I love. The second member of the Trinity who has always existed from eternity past in a reciprocal relationship with the Father and the Spirit, takes on human flesh, given to a teenage girl named Mary in a little town called Bethlehem, in an unknown stable cave. Grows up in chaos, leaves to Egypt under the threat of a tyrant and murder, stays there, and out of Egypt, Jesus comes. The second member of the Trinity, the Father saying, this is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. And so Dale Bruner in his commentary says this, here, in this moment, the Father is saying in so many words, in this man is everything I want to say, reveal, and do, and everything I want people to hear, see, and believe. If you want to know anything about me, if you want to hear anything from me, if you want to please me, get together with him. The Son who has always been from eternity is now wrapped in clothes, lying in a manger, and is in Egypt and is called out. So J.I. Packer, thinking about the divinity of Jesus and the incarnation, says, God became man. The divine Son became a Jew. The Almighty appeared on earth as a helpless human baby, unable to do more than lie and stare and wriggle and make noises, needing to be fed and changed and taught to talk like any other child. If you've been a parent, you know the helplessness of this baby. The one in which God the Father says, this is my Son whom I love, with him I am well pleased, took on flesh. The babyhood of the Son, Packer continues, the Son of God was a reality. The more you think about it, the more staggering it gets. Nothing in fiction is so fantastic as is the truth of the incarnation. Matthew, using Hosea, says the true Son of God is Jesus Christ. And this idea that he would come and rescue you shouldn't just grab your attention, it should grab your heart, your affections, your love. Do you understand that Jesus just isn't out for your duty? Yeah, sure, begrudgingly, I'll submit, I'll do these things, I'll give my money. No, he's out for your love. And may I suggest that some of the malaise of modernity, the sense that things are empty, is because you love the wrong things in the wrong order. It's not wrong to love your job. It's not wrong to love recreation. It's not wrong to go on a trip. It's not wrong. It's not wrong. But you love them in the wrong order. That at the top of the list should be the person, the work, the saving work of Jesus Christ in your life from your sin. He's not out for your duty. He's out for your love. And this is the love that is come to us in Jesus being the Son of God. Man, a new love. You need a new love this Christmas. Then, let's keep looking. A new story. A new story. Again, let's go to Hosea chapter 11 and think about this word son again. We just saw it in the redefinition that Jesus is the new Son of God and Israel. It was the idea that the Son of God was Israel is an Old Testament idea. Now we're going to see the Son in the fulfillment of Israel's story. That Jesus fulfills Israel's story. That in Matthew chapter 2, he shows us that the Hosea passage, which references the exodus of Israel from Egypt, is fulfilled in Jesus because Jesus is now the true embodiment of Israel. That in all of the hopes and longings, even Matthew, that chart that we showed, that all of the hopes and search of the Old Testament is fulfilled in Jesus Christ. That Jesus is the new Israel. He's the new Son of God, and he is the new Israel. In all of its positive ways, Jesus fulfills these things, but also in a negative way. Because the nation of Israel thought about, implemented in Genesis chapter 12 through Abraham, that they would be a blessing to the nations, that they would be pure in devotion to God, that they would love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength. That they would be the representers of God's love among the nations. This was the hope and the desire of Israel, but there was a problem. That they were tainted by sin and destruction and a waywardness away from God. And so all of the hope of Israel always was not met. It was never met. And yet in Jesus we see that it is met. So, I wanted to show you this. Hosea 11:1, out of Egypt I called my son. Out of Egypt I called my son. And what happens is that Jesus is the fulfillment of Egypt being called the Son of God. Wait a second. In Hosea chapter 11, verse 2, here's what it says. But the more they were called, the more they went away from me. They sacrificed to the Baals and they burned incense to images. So all the hope of Israel, I called them out of Egypt, but the more I called, they ran away. It's like a spouse running after a wayward spouse. Hey, come back, come back, come back. And they keep running away. Not only that, is that they sacrificed to the Baals, to foreign gods. They're cheating on their spouse. And they burned incense to images. And so even in the Exodus, this dramatic saving of the people of Israel, they're out in the wilderness and they're like, well, yeah, I guess this is okay. But at least in Egypt, when we were slaves, we were able to eat meat, which they never were able to. So they start to just begrudge the saving works of God. No thanks. Moses goes up on the mountain to Sinai to mediate a new covenant, bringing the very words of God and presence and favor of God to the people. They get bored. They're like, oh, let's build a statue. Let's build a golden calf, and we're going to bow to it. And so Israel does not ever come close to being the people that they should be. And so this text says something weighty about the person of Jesus Christ. That Jesus is the one who came to fulfill all that Israel was designed to perform. All the adulteries and idolatries and rebellion and waywardness that characterized Israel would be recast in the true Israel, Jesus Christ. That God sent his Son to do himself what his people could not and would not do. That Jesus is the new Son of God and he is the new Israel. If you're to align with the story of Jesus or the story of Israel, my sense is in your most honest moment, you would look at the life of Jesus and say, I don't know if I align so much with his life. Never a jarring note, never an angry tone, never a moment of disobedience, solid, stable, loving, selfless, giving, right? But if you read the story of Israel, like I actually could align more with that story. I could align with the story of having great opportunities that I squander. I would align and maybe appreciate more the story of all of these hopes, but this idea of adultery and rebellion against God. We would align more with being able to say, hey, I'll be there, but we never are. That we break relationship with the people closest to us because of our own selfishness. That we have secrets that we don't want anybody else to know about, and we just kind of keep them hidden, thinking that we'll be okay, that time will heal this sort of thing. We are these people who are wayward. We have misplaced loves. We have regrets, shame, abuse, failure, addictions that we all face and feel. And the malaise of modernity is this idea that we live with this sense of emptiness because of these things. Because of where we're at, that we align so much with the story of Israel. And Jesus, seen in Matthew, is the fulfillment of Israel's story. May I suggest to you that your story, if you think about it, if you reflect, is pointing to something better and greater to make sense of and redeem your story, and that's Jesus Christ. Christmas is a painful reminder, often, of the relational gaps in our lives, the relational failures in our life, the relational pains in our life. And I think what Matthew is doing through Hosea here is that when your story of failure, shame, abuse, wandering, addictions meets the story of Jesus, as Israel's story is redeemed in Jesus, your story can also be redeemed and repurposed. That your worst moments can be forgiven, cleaned, and healed, and in a grace-filled judo move can actually become some of the story that you tell to the world as a trophy of God's story in your life. See, the governing story of our culture is prove yourself, succeed, and if you don't, you're canceled. Don't squander your opportunity. You got one shot. But the governing story of Jesus is different. It's about grace, forgiveness, second chances, and a new future filled with hope. So this is what's available. Is a new story, a new love, and a new story for you and with you. That as we come to Jesus with all of the brokenness of our story, and we say, Jesus, here it is. I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not diluting it anymore. Here it is in front of you. See, he takes that stuff, that shame and pain and guilt and the suffering and the questions, and his grace and his love touches every single part of that. And you can live in a new story, not full of regret and shame, but rather of healing and hope. And this is our conviction, that no story is too far gone. No one is too far gone. This is our conviction. And that's one of the reasons why this week, starting December 14th, we're opening up our building for an inclement cold weather, emergency weather shelter here in partnership with the Mustard Seed, because we believe that no story is too far gone. That when someone's story meets the story of Jesus, that something happens and a new future is possible. This is true of you, and this is true of the people that we see in our community that have these types of needs. So continue to pray along with us. How do you fill this sense of emptiness? You need a new love, a new story, and finally, a new freedom. A new freedom. Here is what he says in a new freedom. Hosea chapter 11 says this: when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. So we've been focusing on son. Now we're just going to look at Egypt. This is a reference to the exodus of God's people. If you're new to church, it's a very, very pivotal story, paradigmatic story in the Old Testament about God rescuing his people from Pharaoh. 10 commandments, the plagues, that's what he's referencing. And so here, this is a reference to the exodus, pure and simple. That Matthew is saying that Jesus is the new Moses and the new Exodus. So think about the story with me. Moses, Old Testament figure, was rushed away from a tyrant and murder of boys due to Pharaoh's fear. Jesus rushed away from a tyrant and murder of boys due to Herod's fear. Moses was spared due to his mom hiding him in a basket in Egypt. Jesus was spared because of Mary hiding him in Egypt. Moses brought the people out of Egypt and out of slavery. Jesus himself was brought out of Egypt upon Herod's death and will bring his people out of slavery as well through his death and resurrection. So there's so many ways that Jesus and Moses are the same, but there's some ways that they are unlike. See, unlike Moses, Jesus ushers his people not out of physical slavery, but of a slavery to sin and death. Unlike Moses, Jesus doesn't just represent God, but is God himself fighting on behalf of his people. Unlike Moses, Jesus doesn't escape because of the death of a spotless lamb, but he himself is the lamb that is crucified, and his blood covers the sin and rebellion of all people, not just those of Israel, but of all people. This is what Matthew is saying. Do you see this? One little phrase in Matthew means all of these things. He is the new Son of God. He is the new Israel, and he is the new Exodus, a new freedom. That Jesus Christ does something as the Son of God in his birth, through his life, and in his death and resurrection. That Jesus has come as the Son of God in rescuing love for you. Jesus is the new Moses who leads you and I into freedom from our slavery to sin. He has saved you from the things that you can't. Do you understand that the Christmas story isn't just nice and light, it's actually offensive to you. Because the Christmas story simply says this: you can't save yourself. Oh, if I just have this new thing, if I just go to that vacation spot, if I just get a new spouse, if I just get a better job, you can't save yourself. It won't work. The Christmas story says that someone had to come and rescue you from yourself, from the things you do and the things you don't do, from your addictions, from your past, from your waywardness, from the lie that you believe that you are God and you can live as if there isn't one. The Christmas story is an indictment. It's a delight, but it is an indictment. And this is the new freedom that Jesus has come to bring you. A freedom from your stuff and your guilt and your shame and the emptiness of life. That's what the Christmas story is all about. And this is what Matthew is saying. My question for you, are you living in this freedom? Like, are you free? Or are you bound by the addictions and the stuff of your life? That's what Christmas is about. A new love, a new story, and a new freedom. One of my favorite places to go on earth is Disneyland. I'm a 39-year-old man, and I would go every year if I could. One of the original rides at Disneyland is the Pirates of the Caribbean. It's a great ride. If you've ever been, you know exactly kind of how it goes. You get into that little boat and you're in the water and you come into this big vacuous space, this big open space, and there's these boats and they're kind of firing these fake cannons and there's all these pirates and all that sort of stuff. And once you exit that big space, the first little exhibit that you come into is this. There's 3 pirates who are behind bars. And they have bones. And they're trying to woo a dog that's outside of the jail with a key in his mouth. And they're trying to get this dog to come over so they can get out of jail, right? It's a really interesting picture. But if you look carefully the next time you go, right when you enter the exhibit, look to your right, and what you will see is that a huge, massive log that is burning has actually broken through the door of the jail, and the jail is wide open. Do you see? As these pirates are trying to get this dog to come with the key, they don't realize that the door is open already. They can just walk out. And I think this is the hope for you. Why Jesus has come is that as we're trying to figure out a way to be free from our stuff, we're trying to figure out the new thing, the new cool thing, the new relationship, whatever. Here's the thing, is that the door's already open. Jesus has come and died in your place to forgive you and to clean you and to rescue you into a new place where you can live free and open, fully known to God and fully known to others. This is the hope of Christianity. So this leads us to the communion table, this moment of grace that the church has loved and thought about and practiced for centuries. We want to be filled, we want to be happy, and we want to be whole. The question is, how? I want to remind you that there's a new love to supplant and throw away your lesser ones. There's a new story that you can have to make sense of your past and your hurts. And there's a new freedom to live fully free and alive. So, as we come to the table, we are reminded that there is a better story found in Jesus Christ. This is a moment as a body, as a community, where we come and we say, my story has met the story of Jesus Christ. And so this is a practice for those who would consider themselves Christians, followers of Jesus, as apprentices of Jesus Christ. So for thousands of years, we've gathered around a table as Jesus has brought new meaning to an ancient meal from Israel. Again, fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. And so Pastor Paul in 1 Corinthians 11 leads this ancient church to this ancient meal. And he says, "For I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, he took bread. We had given thanks. He broke it and said, 'This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me.'" With this bread, he just brings himself into the full meaning that the bread of the Passover feast in the Exodus is actually me. This is the new hope. This is the new Exodus. This is my body. Do this in remembrance of me. And then he goes on and he says, "In the same way after supper, he took the cup, saying, 'This cup is a new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes.'" So would you come to the table, maybe wherever you are? I wish you were in the room with us as we do it here corporately. But may you experience the new love, the new story, and the new freedom that Jesus gives to us this Christmas season. Lord, meet my friends where they are. I pray that the people who experience Christmas in a negative way, it brings up so much for them, or this Christmas, it is different than any other, for whatever reason, Lord, I would ask that you would find them, bring them a new love, a new story, and a new freedom. We thank you, Jesus, for what you've done for us. We thank you for the truth and beauty of the incarnation, that it would stir our hearts again. And our response would be one of love and surrender. So we thank you. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week.